Zachary, why don't you go ahead and start?
Okay. Good evening, everybody. Welcome. If this is your first time joining us, everyone will remain muted throughout the meeting except for the committee co-chairs and the presenters. Following the presentation, co-chairs will call on members of the public wishing to speak. You can participate by going to the reactions icon, pressing raise hand, not the wave or thumbs up buttons. Only press it once. If you press it a second time, your hand will go back down. If you're on the phone, it is *9 to raise hand and *6 to unmute. Be on the lookout for a prompt asking you to confirm unmuting once the co-chairs call on you. The chat is for technical support only to help with Zoom software problems, not to ask questions of the co-chairs. They will not see the chats. If you have an older version of Zoom, you will need to go to the participant section where you will find the raise hand feature there. Please do not raise your actual hand or wave at the screen because we may not be able to see you. Chat me, I'm here for support.
Should I get started? Thank you, Zachary and Will. Great. They always do this wonderful job of getting ready and helping us with the meetings. DA, I'm sorry. Okay. DA Bragg has been promised to come and visit us. He actually came to a full board meeting, but because of time, we weren't able to ask questions, and therefore he offered to have people come here from his office. So we're so pleased to have two people. Joyce Smith is the chief of trials, and she will be speaking. And also we have Estelle Stryker Santiago, and they will both be helping us with questions. And I think many of us will have many. So thank you so much. Would you like to get started? Is it Estelle that would do most of it, or Joy?
Actually, it will be our chief of the trial division. We're joined by
Estelle. Thank you.
Yeah, she's here on behalf of DA Bragg, and I'm here to support our chief of the trial division, Joyce Smith. I'll turn it over to Joyce.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Rutter, and
hi.
Hi.
And it's Wilma and Rebecca, Wilma Johnson and Rebecca Dangor, our co-chairs of this committee. I forgot to mention that, so thank you.
Wonderful, and thank you all so much for welcoming our office back to speak with you about some of DA Bragg's priorities for the administration. And I truly want to be able to dive into your questions and answer them to the best of my ability and to Estelle's ability. Also with us from Danny is Kevin Jean-Baptiste. So we want to continue where I guess DA Bragg left off, and that is just restating his commitment to balancing public safety with fairness. I've been a prosecutor for going on 25 years. I started in the Queens DA's office in 1996 and have been prosecuting cases, primarily domestic violence cases, but then later went into major crimes and other offenses, and worked around the city and the mayor's office to combat domestic violence, and also did some work in the federal government with the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. I can tell you that for the greater part of my legal career, I have not seen the type of transformative energy that DA Bragg brings to Manhattan and that this administration has introduced into the criminal justice system. We've obviously had a couple of months that have been challenging on several fronts, but the good news is that we are headed in the right direction. We are still committed to the same principles and the theories that DA Bragg articulated at the early part of his administration. But now we're fine-tuning it to bring everything that we do into alignment with the day-to-day operations and making for a successful operation. You know, our office comprises close to 1,500 people who are all working together to keep Manhattan safe. And you can imagine that in every corner of the office, we have different backgrounds and interests and areas of criminal justice that we focus on. But one thing is true, that we're all committed to the same goal. And the goal is on every case, with every crime victim, with every accused person or defendant, we need to do the right thing in that case. though we will look at the cases globally in the executive level, and the DA has given us that perspective that we have to examine the data and examine the statistics and the numbers that are relevant to our office and to the practice of criminal law. He's also asked us to make sure that we balance that global perspective with the truly granular understanding of what every single case looks like from the inside out, both to our assigned ADAs, but also to our partners in the defense bar, to our police officers, and most importantly, to the members of the community that we serve. And so I'm truly proud to join this administration. As I mentioned before, I worked for most of my career under Richard Brown, and then later joined Nassau County and spent the latter 6 months of my career there as the acting DA of Nassau. And so the idea that this work is going to continue in large measure because of your support, because of your informing us where we're going wrong and what we're doing right. I'm hoping that these lines of communication will stay open to make us the best DA's office that we can be. So with that, I'll open up for questions. And if you have anything specific that you'd like to ask me, I guess I'll turn it over to our facilitators and they can moderate our conversation.
Rebecca, do you want to call on?
Yeah, so if you'd like to ask a question, either a committee member, a member of the board, or public, please raise your hand and we'll get to, I'm sure the co-chairs of the committee have some questions as well, so we'll get to those after. Yeah, me too. Okay, anyone? Oh, I see one member of the public, Stephanie Reckler.
Hi, Joyce. It's Stephanie Reckler. I've lived on the Upper East Side all my life. I've seen crime levels go up, then go down. Now they're going up again. We heard from somebody from the 19th precinct who confirmed that, yes, crime is now, and safety on the streets is now a big issue. And I'd like to know from you, what do you think a deterrent for crime is? Do you think punishment is a deterrent? How can we reduce the level of crime so that people feel safe in the streets again? They feel safe in the subways. I mean, we've heard from subway workers that they're terrified to go to work. What is a deterrent? What can we do to feel safe again? To take the subway, to take mass transit, to go into the shops on the street and not be worried that a group is going to come in and rob the store. What can we do? What can you do? What can your office do?
Thank you so much for that question, Ms. Reckler. That's what wakes us up early in the morning, and that's what keeps us up at night. We were just talking about that with some of our allies in this work and trying to determine what is the most effective measure to not only reduce recidivism, but also to make sure that the deterrence is effective. And if we think about this, it's sort of from the larger perspective, there are just about 5 goals of modern punishment. So we used to use like public humiliation and physical pain to tell someone they shouldn't commit a crime or shouldn't violate some social norm. Now we've refined it, we've evolved, and we look at 5 ways to address crime. We look at punishment globally as incapacitation or incarceration, meaning that person cannot engage in criminal behavior because they just can't access the ability to do that. They cannot. And that's where we think of traditional incarceration. We think of that goal saying this individual should not be at liberty to engage in this offense again. Another goal is deterrence. And you mentioned that at the outset, and that's really where we focus because deterrence is about prevention. Deterrence is about specifically telling that individual in a way that they will comprehend and that they will respond to, that you should not reoffend in this way, that you should deter or take a detour out of this criminal behavior So we need to find out what that individual's cause of their crime has been so that we can speak most effectively to that cause to get to the root, right? We sometimes will pay attention to the leaves and to the branches, but not pay attention to the root and what caused them to offend. If that individual is struggling with substance use disorder, if that person has a longstanding mental health issue, we need to address those roots of their criminal behavior and not simply look at the symptom of those causes. But then you also talked about deterrence, and we have to look at it through the general perspective of how can we tell everybody else walking on the street, this is not behavior that we as a society want you to engage in. The way that we do that is we have to be crystal clear, not only in our goals, but also in our tolerance level for criminal behavior. And that says, as a society, we're willing to understand if you need our help. We're willing to, because I think we have a generally very understanding and forgiving citizenry throughout Manhattan. We try to help people who want that help, and we extend ourselves through social services to give them that assistance. And we ask them, will you voluntarily, will you engage in this assistance on your own or of your own accord? We see some of that through many of our social service agencies. But if the individual says, I don't want your help, I either don't think I have a problem, I'm not cognizant of my problem, or I'm not yet at a position that I'm willing to take some control over that problem or accountability for my own actions, then the question of making sure that the rest of society is safe comes into play. And that's where we truly have to consider the alternatives and the programs and the assistance and the diversion may not be the option for that individual. And the fact that we now need to keep the greater society safe is the most important goal. So general deterrence and specific deterrence is what comes to my mind, but I want to highlight a couple of other things. You know, rehabilitation was always a goal of the criminal justice system's methods of punishment, but we also now look at restorative justice. And restorative justice says we need to restore the community or the individual crime victim who's been harmed to the place that they would have been in before the harm occurred or before the crime occurred. But we also need to try, when that person re-enters that society from a period of incarceration, to make sure that they're not going to reoffend. And that goes back to the question of specific deterrence. It goes back to how do we correct the behavior so they don't reoffend and recidivate. Long answer to a short question. The best thing I can tell you is this is what criminologists get paid for. This is what we, as an office, as DAs, struggle with every single day. This is what our legislators try to figure out through enacting policies and laws to guide us. It's a collective answer. We need everyone, your help and your influence to help us make the right choices to deter people from committing offenses that harm all of us.
Do you think that punishment, incarceration is a deterrent to other people? Do you think leniency of not incarcerating people and sending them to social services if they'll go, is that, do you think, is that Attorney Bragg's philosophy? Because we hear that he lets people, he's more lenient to offenders than his predecessor. Is that true?
I would absolutely say that's not true. Categorically speaking, that's not true. In fact, if we look at some of our numbers in the office throughout the last 10 years, and we're in the process of analyzing those now, we're finding that our practices have not dramatically changed over the course of even the last 2 years. Well, over the last 2 years, we've all been influenced by two major unprecedented pressures on our criminal justice system. The pandemic plus criminal justice reform changed everything that we do in a way that I've never seen in the last 25 years. So everything that we have to do now as a criminal justice system to answer for one person's criminal offense is different. The traditional measures are not working. And the one thing I can tell you is DA Bragg is not more lenient. He tries to be more comprehensive and analytical in his understanding of these causes of crime than any than any prosecutor that we've seen in the past several generations. The idea that leniency is not the measurement, that is not the tool. The question is, how do you stop the person from doing it again? How do we prevent the next crime victim? And what we know for sure, I can tell you for sure, because I've been doing this for a while, what we've been doing all along hasn't worked. The fact that we've been trying the same hammer over and over and over again on the same individual. The way that it was a baby ADA prosecuting a petty larceny, the first offense, you're facing 30 days in jail. The second offense, you're facing 60 days in jail. The next offense, you face 90. And we go through this ladder and this evolution of incarceration, and the same person is reoffending. That's not the answer. So the truth is, DA Bragg is saying, I don't want to use the same tool. I need a scalpel. I need to figure out what the cause of the crime is. I need to get to the root of the person's recidivism, and I need to stop that at its core. I think that's a really smart and comprehensive way to approach prosecution, at least, and I don't just say that because he's my boss. I say that, having seen other measures of this sort of work.
Thank you. We have our hopes on him.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Before we move on to the next speaker, I just wanted to do a quick follow-up question because you mentioned restorative justice and not everyone understands kind of what that means or what it entails. So could you maybe explain that concept a little bit more and then maybe specifically kind of address the, victims' involvement and whether or not, just so we're all on the same page. I think Joyce is muted by mistake.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I needed to mute because there was a ringing landline in the back. So restorative justice is really the last in the evolution of criminology, criminal justice, and the system of crime and punishment over the last, several hundred years. And now we're going back to about the early, you can chase this back to the Code of Hammurabi, and you can chase it back to earlier parts of our system of kind of jurisprudence. But here's the thing. When we look at a crime as some harm that has been inflicted on an individual, on a community, or on a family, we have to now look at the core, and we look at that crime as the center or the hub in the middle of a wheel. And the question of restorative justice is, who's connected to that hub? What are the spokes? What's connected to the crime or the criminal incident is an offender, right? Somebody who's offended or broken the law. A victim, typically it could be an individual, or it might be an enterprise, it might be a company, it might be a store, right? There's some individual or group that has been harmed, but there's also a community that's part of that wheel. That community is harmed when an individual is removed from the community, or maybe the offender is removed from the home, and that offender is the breadwinner. That offender is responsible for providing for a family. That offender is responsible for delivering groceries. That person is now responsible for being a participant in and a contributor to that community. When we remove them, the community is affected. But I'm also affected if I'm a community member walking down the block and I saw something tragic or horrible happen on my corner. I'm afraid to walk down that block, and I might not want to proceed in the same way and live my life accordingly. So as a community member, I'm affected whether I'm a crime victim, witness, or someone that's actually had an offender or an accused removed from my home. But then there's the larger society, and that's another spoke on the restorative justice wheel that says the larger society is going to be impacted because each home is in a community, and each community is in a neighborhood, and each neighborhood is in a city, et cetera, et cetera. So the larger wheel, if you think of it as the restorative justice wheel, brings all of these spokes together and concentrates them back to the incident moment, to that moment when the offense happens. And it asks, as a theory, as a principle, how can we prevent this from happening again? We speak to the community to be informed about what community-based resources are available in that community that are relevant to that community, that are necessary for the community to be involved in the healing process and in the restoration process. Then we look at what the offender as an individual needs to be specifically deterred from that action. And here's the interesting thing on restorative justice, which is something that I'm fascinated by, and we truly as a system need to explore this in a deeper, more comprehensive way, and the DA is committed to this. Victim offender mediation says, if I've been harmed by you, by something you did, or something you did to a family member of mine, maybe you ended my loved one's life in a homicide, I need an opportunity to speak to you about what that did to me. And I need an opportunity, if I choose, to work through the process of restoration and healing that will be necessary for me to go on with my life. That's a very difficult process. Most people are not ready to operate at that level of engagement. But it is it's new, right? It's sort of on the tail end. And I say new, meaning the last like 20 years. It's new in the sense that it's a different way for us to try to make sure that the offender appreciates the gravity of his or her actions, and that the victim or the victim's family has an opportunity to speak truth into that individual's life in a way that will be more meaningful than a corrections officer or a judge or a prosecutor being involved in that person's life. So what we find with restorative justice is, recidivism is reduced because there's something about that formula that impacts a person on a level that our traditional measures just can't. So I'm excited to see how we can, continue using that here and maybe on a broader basis in Manhattan.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I love that you use the word, choice, if they're ready. Because I think that's something that, a lot of people don't realize is obviously kind of at the heart of the conversation. I did see another member of the public who had his hand raised, but it was lowered. So can we unmute Boaz next?
Hey, thank you very much. So I came to Upper East Side in 2012 together with my wife. So it's interesting to hear people that have been living here all their life, their experience, and maybe it's a cycle. What do I mean is that I separate the time between 2012 to 2020, summer of 2020, as overall, I felt that the city during the time was super safe, specifically talking about the subway. For example, my wife is a medical doctor. She has to go to take the subway in weird hours, and she didn't have any problem. Around the summer of 2020 and to now, there are certain hours that we're not using the subway, for example, anymore because we don't feel safe. Now, I don't know if it's because of the COVID. I don't know, maybe Stephanie that has been living here all their life will say, okay, it's just a cycle. Now we are in a bad cycle. In 2 years, it will be, I don't know. But my question is, someone is looking at the data and, like you said, understanding the root cause of why we are having this bad cycle of that people don't feel, don't feel that they are safe in the subway, in certain streets, and but that's basically. I hope the question makes sense. Thank you.
It does, and I thank you, Mr. Galil. Am I pronouncing that right? So the idea that we should be safe on our streets, in our homes, in our businesses, and on the subway is at the heart of DA Bragg's, not just his approach to this work, but also what he's infusing into every single meeting, every conference that we have, every conversation we're having. Public safety is why we get into this work, why we become prosecutors, right? We want to make sure that the people we're serving feel safe, right? Whether or not we are safe is usually driven by our statistics, our data, and our analysis. Whether or not I feel safe is something a little more intangible. I have to feel safe when I walk down that subway platform at night. And unfortunately, we've reached this crisis in our city where individuals who need care, who need treatment, who need someone to address the root causes of behavior that is not within societal norms, those individuals need the assistance and that approach of fairness and understanding, a comprehensive fairness to their situation, to their behavioral patterns that addresses the root causes. As I mentioned before, we tried this before in the 80s, right? Where we had individuals who were in the subways and on our corners. We arrested them for petty larceny, for loitering, for trespassing. They were released back into the street, into the subways, and they reoffended. And we did that in a cycle that repeated the behavior, repeated the response over and over and over again. And that, as a society, is insanity. That is not the answer to these problems. We have to try something different. So we have these new approaches, right? If this individual is suffering from homelessness, we have teams of social service providers who are paired up with our police officers who are able to help address their root cause. I'm here in the subway because I don't have any place to go. And this is what I believe is the only choice. It's not the only choice. Here are some options. I'm here in the subway and I don't, maybe I'm not conscious of, or I can't appreciate the wrongfulness of my conduct because I'm suffering from some mental health crisis. I need to make sure that that individual gets sufficient treatment and that they are able to be removed from the place where they pose a danger to those who are taking mass transit. I'm an individual who's struggling with a substance use disorder, and the last rehab that I went to didn't work and they released me. And I just can't get the proper treatment and care that's going to stop or interrupt this cycle of this health crisis that I'm in. The question of having them, detox in a jail cell, is that the smartest thing for us to do? Probably not. Probably not. So if we can recognize the impact of the modern day health crisis, that is substance use disorder, that is mental health, that is homelessness, right? Because being homeless isn't a crime. When that homelessness creates other situations or behaviors that lead to crime, that's when our office gets involved. But we need some of those pre-existing conditions to be treated in an effective way so that the ultimate symptom is not borne out in a crime. So our hope is that we'll be able to get partnership through our healthcare providers. Obviously, our police officers are doing the frontline work every day. They're encountering these individuals every day. But all of our goals should be the same. We want people to feel safe when they're taking the subway and walking down the street. And I believe we are on the same, on one accord with that.
Thank you. Next, let's call on Ellen.
Hi. So I so appreciate what you're saying. We had the privilege of interviewing Mr. Bragg before the election, and a lot of what you're talking about is what he talked about. And then I had an experience with a friend of mine who goes through cycles of psychosis and ends up getting arrested or going to the hospital and getting treatment and then being sent back out. But this time he did something that many people would not be arrested for, but because he's known, he got arrested for it and put into a jail and was in the hospital for about 6 months. Sent out back home. I had followed up and begged them to find him finally some, another, not an apartment, but just like supportive housing. Yeah. So we wouldn't have the cycle that continues every 6 months or once every couple of years once he's off the court-ordered medication. And what I was told was that there's just not enough housing. There's not enough psychiatric treatment. He had to wait about 4 months to get psychiatric treatment in the community before they would release him. So he was in this temporary holding pattern for 4 months, during which time he was just kind of sleeping all the time. And then when they finally released him, he was released to the community with no money. The $20 that I had sent for support in the facility, for extras in the facility, that's all he had. So he ended up on my doorstep. And my problem was that because of HIPAA laws, nobody would actually talk to me. And because he's got a psychiatric condition, he didn't want anybody to talk to me. So where is the community in this? Where, where there might be community members that could do reporting or support, for people in the community that they might know. But there's no way of interacting with the medical professionals to allow that to go on. And, to allow some active cooperation between a lay person and the medical people. And the second question that I have about this is, how much clout does your office have in talking to city council, in talking to the state folks to provide more funding for more psychiatric treatment? I mean, I've been struggling with this I've had conversations with psychiatrists and psychologists and a relative of mine who runs a facility very much like what my friend was in. And he said, you need to start when people are children, when adults are actually children, because you can see it, you can see this in a child, and you can, if you catch them young enough, you can treat the child and possibly, possibly stave off or ward off them becoming adults who are crime, perpetrators. So, or violent, or people who are violent. So my question is, how much clout do you have? Are you working on that? Are you coming up with suggested legislation that you could give to people in city council or people in, in some level of government?
Thank you so much for that question, Ms. Pallavi.
Pallavi,
thank you. So those are two great questions. I'm going to answer the second part, and I'm going to toss to my partner, Ms. Estelle, so that she can chime in on some of that community engagement, which I think is critical to our success. Yes, DA Bragg just recently testified in front of the city council, along with the other sitting elected DAs of our city. And in his testimony, and it's available online, he specifically said, we want to be able to consider, and he is building up our diversion opportunities for individuals who come into the criminal justice system by building out our Pathways to Public Safety division. In most of the offices that I've either worked in or worked around, we usually have one person who's known as the ATI person or the Alternatives to Incarceration person. And that individual has a mammoth responsibility to try to figure out all of the necessary program referrals, social service supports, housing needs, right, to be able to make sure that that person receives whatever it is, whatever intervention they need to prevent the next crime from happening. So first, we are typically under-resourced because we don't have the human resources to build out these offices. And by that, I mean, and just bringing you in for a moment to the DA's office operations, if in an office our size, which, we're one of the largest in the country, if not among the largest, we have had typically about 6 to 8 ADAs devoted to diversion. And that is their responsibility, is making sure that cases that come in, they're assessed for the person's biopsychosocial needs, and they determine whether or not there's a program or service available to address those needs. That is an alternative, or that could serve as an alternative to incarceration. Well, in an office our size, with 6 to 8 people doing that, and in our mental health treatment court, we have a cap of only 50 cases that we're able to refer through that process of diversion for mental health treatment. We're not serving the vast majority of people like the neighbor that you described might need to interrupt the cycle of incarceration. So the first thing the DA asked for is funding from the city council to be able to expand our Pathways to Public Safety division to hire staff. More staff means more human resource. More human resource means that we can devote more careful attention to each and every case that comes to our doors. The other thing that was an important change that took place over about the last 5 years, I want to say, is that the civil forfeiture laws changed, meaning when we seize assets from an individual involved in a crime and we turn those assets, we liquidate those assets essentially, and we're now able to use that funding to devote into different crime prevention programming, community partnership programming, law enforcement programming. When the federal government changed basically these asset forfeiture laws, now we're no longer able to devote because the funding has been whittled down to almost nullify our ability to do this work. But that civil forfeiture funding base now prevents us from being limited, prevents us from being able to fund community-based organizations that would do this work to help offset some of the criminal justice system's influence in this area. So, we've had a couple of hits. I mean, frankly, we've had this reduction in resources. We've had an overburdened, overtaxed court. Our ADAs every day are balancing 100 plus cases. Our system is at a critical mass, and our goal through DA Bragg's approach to this work is let us focus on the most serious violent offenders. Let us divert individuals out of the criminal system into those services that they need to prevent recidivism. And in doing so, we'll be smarter prosecutors. But we can't do it alone. And so, Estelle, if you would just kind of share some of the community engagement work, because your voice matters. Your voices matter.
Yeah, thank you, Joyce. And I will, share. I've been in the office for many years, 30 years, and served under, this is my third district attorney. And what I really appreciate about DA Bragg and what he's brought to the office is this focus on the importance of partnering with the community. And so the team, I think Kevin had to get off, but Kevin Jean-Baptiste and I oversee a number of different things, but Kevin's team specifically is our community engagement team. And to your point, if we're going to be doing this work not in silos where we're just stop just using incarceration and prosecution as the strategy for improving public safety, we need to have partnerships, right, with the other agencies that can help to address some of the issues. So especially right now with all of sort of the homelessness that we've talked about, mental health issues, I do think that the summer of 2020 was a real turning point in terms of crime going back up and mental health issues really kicking up. And so there's a lot of work to do. And some of it is our office, and some of it is the Department of Homeless Services, and some of it is community-based organizations that serve people who need help. And we need to work together. So our unit, Kevin and I, have a team of people whose job on behalf of DA Bragg is to be out in the community and really know what's going on in the community. We have liaisons assigned geographically. Right now, we actually don't have somebody assigned to the Upper East Side. It's posted and we are interviewing and going to be hiring somebody. In the meantime, Kevin and I will be covering your community until we hire that person. But what we do is we go to meetings like yours. We know all the community-based organizations that are in each of the areas that we cover. We meet with them on a regular basis. If it's gun violence that's impacting a certain community in Manhattan, we know those who serve people who are either involved with the gun violence or impacted by it, and we partner together and we say, what are we going to do to stop this? So that while our office may be focusing on that small percentage of people that are driving that violence, we're all working together to reach the others so they don't become part of that small population, and that we find other paths for them. We're mission driven. Our mission is to increase trust between the community and our office, to raise awareness about what a district attorney does, what this district attorney's vision is, and different public safety issues that the community is facing, whether it's internet safety, domestic violence, gun violence prevention. We can bring prosecutors out to talk to groups about these issues. We're doing a lot now around seniors and scams against seniors and against the immigrant community. Can bring people out to talk about that. The third component of what we do is we ensure access for all the communities that we serve in Manhattan. We challenge the office, and again, this new administration is open to this challenge, and we're making changes that I've been hoping for a long time around things like understanding different cultural differences as to why people might be afraid to come forward, where a victim may be uncomfortable coming forward. What can we do to help them to feel more comfortable? And language barriers is a big one that we're working on as well. And then the final part of our mission is to create partnerships that prevent crime and increase public safety for the communities that we serve. And that looks different from community to community within Manhattan. And that's why we have people, somebody's assigned to the Lower East Side in Chinatown, somebody else is assigned to Washington Heights and Inwood, somebody will be assigned to the Upper East Side and the Upper West Side. And then we do a deep dive, lock arms with you and figure out how can we work together to make the community safe. And we have work to do because, as was mentioned, we're dealing with a lot of issues, not only in our city, but in the country. But let's do it sort of locally and come up with ways that we can work together to increase public safety. So thank you, Joyce, for giving me a minute to share that. And as soon as we've hired somebody for your area, we will introduce them. And in the meantime, I am available for any kind of follow-up or questions you have about our office.
I mean, maybe calling you for more specific things also. There's a lot of issues we would like to talk about in depth. All right.
Before we call on the next person, you also mentioned someone else is helping cover the Upper East Side. Could you just repeat his name for us?
Baptiste.
Yeah, Kevin.
Kevin. Baptiste.
Yeah.
He's not on anymore, Rebecca.
Right. I will, Rebecca, I can actually email you both of our contact. I don't think I can put it in the chat, right? So
why don't you send it to Will and he'll send it to us.
Okay. Yeah, so it's Kevin Jean-Baptiste.
Right.
Is the other person.
Perfect.
Great, thanks.
If you want to send me contact information to share with everybody in the chat, you can send it to me and I'll put it in the chat.
Thank you. So next we're going to call on Judy Schneider, a member of the public, and then we'll call on our board chair, Russell Swire.
Good evening. I think Ms. Smith and Ms. Stryker's, what you've been talking about is very interesting. And if I'm assuming correctly, we're talking about adults. Right now, we seem to be having a problem on the east side of Community District 8 with youthful reoffenders. And I do mean reoffenders. The police have been very helpful trying to help us with this situation, but they are always out on the street again and bullying and attacking their school chums or former school chums. What does the DA, his plans, what can he do to help us? I know family court is different than the court for the adults. Is there anything that you folks can do to help us with this situation to keep this constant offenders off the street and from bullying our kids?
Similar, thank you for that question, Ms. Schneider. And I'm going to make sure that Estelle is able to chime in here because I think that she and Kevin are working in ways that are directly helpful to young people who are offending criminally. The 2018 raise the age legislation that took away from the criminal justice system the jurisdiction or the authority to address crimes committed by young people in the 16, 17-year age range changed the dynamic, perhaps permanently, in the way that we address these problems that you're experiencing and that you spoke about. Most offenses that a young person in that age range commits will not be prosecuted criminally. most offenses will be sent to family court for adjudication, meaning that, as you said, family court is now responsible for addressing the root cause of the crime, interrupting the behavior that led to the crime or the victimization, addressing the bullying, for example, putting a system in place to monitor the young person's behavior and to hold them accountable for their offense. As with most government systems, family court, just like criminal court, is overburdened, overwhelmed, under-resourced. So they have a separate set of challenges that I'm sure someone from either court counsel or anyone from our family court partners could speak about. But the challenges, so one thing I want to make clear is that unlike when in 2015 or so, when we saw an uptick in adolescent offenses, and we could address them in the criminal system because they're now not being addressed by our office, we reserve only those most seriously violent offenses for criminal prosecution in the adult system. And those offenses are treated just as seriously and just as with as much concentration on a comprehensive measure to stop the offense as we do any other crime. So a young person with a gun is still a dangerous person, whether they are a young person or an adult. We want to make sure that that individual is not acting impulsively, that they're not acting in a dangerous way. But what DA Bragg has recognized is because those within the 18 to 25 age range are still undergoing brain development, they are still learning how to control their impulses, how to act in a way that does not cause harm to other individuals or to society. We have to take that into account when we're trying to address their behavior, when we're trying to hold them accountable. So this is an individual who may not necessarily need a long period of incarceration to address the harm. Perhaps they need to unlearn some of the behaviors or receive treatment for some of the trauma that they may have experienced in their earlier years. So, I heard someone talk earlier about childhood trauma being incredibly impactful in the progress of an adult's development. We look at the ACEs score, we look at whether or not this young person has experienced those types of triggering events that are going to lead to criminal behavior as they grow older. And of course, educating young people about alternatives to or ways to resolve conflicts is something that our community engagement team is responsible for. And maybe you want to talk about some of our school-based programming, our Saturday Night Lights, and other things that we do.
Yeah, sure. I'll also, was it Judith Schneider who asked? Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll just really quickly tell you a couple of programs, but I would also just say this sounds very concerning, that there's some specific things going on that you're aware of, and that I think the key thing will be for us to follow up. And I'd like to jump on a call with you and anybody else from this group or others in the community who are seeing this going on in your area, so that we can do a deeper dive strategy. But we do a lot of schools. You mentioned schools, so I'd want to find out sort of which schools are in the area. We may have already a relationship with the school. If we don't, we would go into the school and just start to kind of talk about how we can work together with them to try to turn this around. We also, like I said, we know all the community-based organizations, both on the Upper East Side all the way up into East Harlem. We would make some connections there. But I would want to kind of do a deeper dive with you to find out more. And then we also run a program called Saturday Night Lights, where we've opened gyms all over. Initially it was in Manhattan, now it's citywide. On Saturday nights, when we've seen statistically that's where oftentimes the most violence is happening among our younger people. And so this program is open every Saturday. And so the kids have a safe place to go, and they get really high quality sports and fitness training in different community centers. So I can get information about that and make sure that the young people know about it. And then we also coordinate with NYPD. So if there needs to be more presence in some block or at a certain hour when you're seeing this happening, we can help to facilitate sort of a strategy to address that. So I did email my contact, and so hopefully you guys will get that. And I emailed it to Will, and I look forward to hearing from you to kind of do a deeper dive conversation about what you're seeing and how we can be helpful with to try to address it.
Thank you.
Russell?
Thank you. So I just wanted to ask about your office's approach to shoplifting, because I think among the crimes that people are concerned about and that we've seen an increase in, that's one. And I think it's one that doesn't necessarily get the sort of headline attention necessarily in the sort of discussions from the office, but it's something that people in the community are very concerned about, because obviously you have the impact on the businesses who are affected, the spillover impacts on the employees of those businesses, but also I think that contributes a lot to just a feeling of unease among the population, the sense that you could have sort of brazen shoplifting going on, or that this is going on and not being punished, or not even really being addressed or sort of pursued. So I think the question is if you could, just sort of let us know what the approach is there for that, because that's a lot of what we've been seeing in the community.
Well, I can talk to you a little about the charging decisions, pretrial detention, and how some of our dispositional data informs our policies. And then I'd love for Estelle to share some about the work that we're doing to bring together community voices around this issue. It's obviously a great concern to all of us. Definitely DA Bragg wants to find the best way for us to interrupt this increase and this kind of disproportionate influence on our crime rates of shoplifting. We've seen the headlines, we've seen the media coverage about it, but our ADAs are experiencing it every day with every new case that comes in. More importantly, our shop owners, our business owners are experiencing it as crime victims, right? So we want to make sure that they and their employees are safe. The concern is this: we had, as I mentioned before, two competing unprecedented pressures put on our work: the pandemic plus criminal justice reform. The pandemic means that we now have a complete slowdown to every point along our workflow in the criminal justice system. That's from arrest to arraignment to appeal, right, post-conviction, et cetera. Everything slowed down during the last 2 years. So we have this influx of cases that we were required to process much more effectively if we could, and efficiently. So that was the influence of the pandemic. Criminal justice reform created an entire category of cases that are not bail eligible. And our legislators, in determining that offenses like petty larceny, which is essentially what a shoplifter might engage in, stealing a dollar amount that's under a certain level, depending upon the aggregate amount, petty larceny is no longer bail eligible. So that means that we can't, and it's required that individual is given a desk appearance ticket, which is not taking them into police custody, but giving them an appointment essentially to come back to court at a later date. And I want to put a pin in that point because it's an important one. That appointment is similar to any other appointment that one might have to answer for a traffic ticket or some other offense. The expectation is that the individual is going to come back when the court requires them to. We found that in 50% of the cases that we've analyzed so far, people are not returning to court with that appointment ticket that's given to them by the police department. So now we're driving the second question, and that is on questions of detention, because remember, the legislation has said these are not bail eligible offenses. We cannot hold that individual in custody. They must be returned to court through the least restrictive means, and that might be supervising their release through one of our criminal justice providers. That might mean making sure that they are monitored in some way through some program of treatment, but there's no criminal justice control over their liberty. They are at liberty once again because of the function of our bail laws. So that's number one. And one thing I would also make clear is if this is a person who is engaging in repeated behavior, what we attempt to do is aggregate the number of offenses that they've engaged in a certain time period and the dollar value of those offenses, because if they exceed, for example, $1,000, they are now committing a higher level offense, a felony for which we might be able to eventually have bail eligibility attached, or we may be able to have some more stringent controls over their liberty to assure their return to court. But the idea that we are not able to return or have these individuals brought back into the courtroom or into our arraignment parts in 50% of the cases is pretty concerning and troubling. And so our next question that the DA is working on is, how do we make sure that those 50% of cases that are returning to court are addressed appropriately? And for that, building out our diversion programming, making sure that individuals who are suffering from substance use disorder, mental health crises are receiving necessary treatment. But there are individuals who are, constantly committing these same shoplifting offenses and perhaps causing a threat of danger or violence. And in those cases, we're going to ask for the harshest penalty possible to make sure that the public is safe. The question, though, is if the individual is being given an opportunity to receive services or treatment, and then they withdraw from that service or withdraw from that treatment provider, how many times is too many times? And we haven't reached an answer yet. There's no category answer that we can find that says after 4 times or 4 entries into a rehab facility or 4 attempts to get this person mental health treatment, that's the cutoff point. Because that means that you get 3 opportunities to reoffend for free and there's no consequence. And on that 4th time, that is when the consequence is going to be severe and swift and certain. It is a really complicated problem that we are trying to figure out. We are trying to make sure that no one's concern is overlooked or unheard. We can look at this situation using the tools and the devices available to us as law enforcement, but we have come to realize that our understanding is limited and even our approach is limited, especially because we're confined by the laws that we enforce. So I would ask Estelle just to kind of touch on what we're doing to bring in other voices into this analysis.
Yeah, thanks, Joyce. So another thing I think we're going to need to follow up with whoever's interested from this group and anybody outside of this group is that the DA formed, one of the feedback that we've been receiving from the community is very similar to what you just said regarding, especially small business is being impacted by shoplifting. And so we formed a small business alliance, and it covers from the very bottom of Manhattan all the way to the top. And we have met twice as a whole group. We include a lot of the bids are represented, some small businesses are represented. And what we've decided to do now is to break off into focus groups by area and also a little bit by certain types of stores, but really by area. And so we're going to meet. So we've already had one, for example, on the Lower East Side in Chinatown. We're about to have one up in the Heights. And so what Kevin and I are forming is a focus group that covers your community as well as the Upper West Side. And so anybody who is interested in being a part of that focus group, any small businesses or bigger businesses that want to join us in this work together to figure out some strategies to address this issue that's really impacting the community, we invite you to be a part of that. My contact information is now in the chat. If you're interested, please reach out to me because Kevin and I are planning to have that focus group from your area, in the next couple of weeks.
So you've already been putting together the focus group, or you're going to start putting together the focus group? What's the sort of status of it?
We're trying to be more specific. We're trying to decide right now if we should have a focus group that covers Midtown and the Upper West Side and Upper East Side as one focus group or 2 separate ones. But our goal is to have that figured out soon and have that focus group happen in the next couple of weeks, whether it's your community with Midtown or separate. And again, anybody who's interested, we can jump on a call, and I'd love your feedback as to whether you think it should be separate or should be a part of the Midtown focus group. I'll also share with you some of the questions that we're looking at, things like, how is this impacting your business? What are some things that what information are you looking for from our office? One of the things we found since we started is we're getting more calls from businesses saying, this arrest took place in my store. Can you tell me the outcome? What happened? What is the status of the case? And we're able to provide that feedback. And then depending upon the feedback, do what Joyce just did for you all, explain some of the things that we're dealing with in terms of how we handle these cases, what a DAT is and what that means. So we've done some work on it already, but this is going to be ongoing and evolving. And so we really want to get more input from small businesses in your community.
I'm just going to
So
I'm sorry, Russell.
you're currently recruiting people for it, or once you decide whether you're going to do one focus group or multiple task forces, then you're going to sort of call out for people to be part of it? I'm trying to just get a more granular sense of what the status is.
The Small Business Alliance is in place, and those meetings are happening already. The focus group that's going to be focused on your area, we are looking for people who are interested to be a part of that. And then once we have, sort of a handful of people, we'll pick a date for that meeting.
Okay, if there's sort of, I think so, yeah. So I think if there's, because I'm not sure that a lot of people know that that's been going on. So I think if there's sort of language or whatever in terms of a solicitation for people wanting to be involved in that you can share with us, that we can also share with people in the district, that would be helpful. And then just the last point on this, just to follow up to my initial question, is just to say, I mean, I think the problem here is very much, I would say, a sort of sense of like an atmosphere of impunity. And I think that's kind of what the community is feeling in terms of people being able to just sort of do this repeatedly and get away with it. And I would venture to say that it may be that that's also how the people who are doing this stuff feel about it. So anyway, I think that's sort of the, hopefully that is a focus for your office as you're looking at this stuff, in terms of trying to combat that aspect of it, because that, I think, is really the crux of the challenge that we're dealing with here.
That is absolutely what we're looking at. That is one of the top concerns that we've heard from other businesses, is the recidivism and the people, sort of feeling opportunistic and just returning and doing it over and over again. And so yes, that is one of the top concerns that we're looking at. We've even found, not that that there's sort of a number of top recidivists that we're aware of, that we're starting to really focus on, similar to what we were talking about before in other types of crimes, where there's a small percentage of people that are really causing the most crime. It's happening also with this particular crime. And we find that some of the businesses know the same people that are coming back. So PD is involved in the Alliance. They're a key partner on it, so that we're also, in constant communication with them in terms of when they have arrested somebody who's known to be a recidivist, that we're communicating about it. So there's a number of things we're doing. Definitely sounds like we need to get more people from your community to know about this and to be involved with it. And I'm happy to work with you on that.
Okay, thank you.
Next, let's go to Will.
Hey, I have a very simple question that probably has a very complex answer. And you mentioned going to the city council, asking for money for a certain program. Where does the DA's budget come from? Is it allocated based out of the NYPD budget, or is it specifically separate? Do each boroughs get the same amount? And how do you fund all of the programs that you talk about?
Separate from the police department, we are funded through city council, but also a combination of, and we are always searching for opportunities to expand our resources. So federal, state, and local grants are also a funding source. The Violence Against Women Act, Office of Victim Services Fund has given us in large measure the ability to do every bit of our witness and victim assistance programming. So everything from relocating individuals who are suffering from either trauma because of a violent event or fear of retaliation, we're able to relocate them. We're able to make sure they get assistance for funerals and expenses connected with medical bills as a result of the crime. So those are just some of the things that we can do to supplement our budget. But the offices are not funded in the same way. One recent challenge that we've had, and this is as a result of those competing pressures of the pandemic and criminal justice reform, is that, when I started in this work, being an ADA was it's never been a well-paying job, frankly. It's something that many young people coming out of law school will do because they're passionate about the work. But our ADAs are, really facing pressures and this being overwhelmed and having a lot of work and feeling underappreciated, frankly, in a lot of ways. Morale is tough, and we need to make sure that those line assistants who are doing this work every day and are the true public servants in this work, that they are appreciated and that we compensate them for their work. I mean, they come in at night, they work on the weekends, we never close. They are on my phone at 3 a.m. and at 4 a.m. because they're out responding to crime scenes. And, we support them and we're proud of them, but we need to show it. And the ability to do that comes from capital and financial resource.
So is there a baseline amount that every DA's office gets every year, or?
I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know. I know that it's apportioned based on our size, right? Our relative sizes are different. We're different than Staten Island. Staten Island is different than Queens, et cetera. But how they utilize their funding is typically a question for the individual elected official.
And in the mayor's recent budget, where he's talked about new policies trying to help, has any of that money that he's been talking about been allocated to the DA's offices?
We are hopeful. But as so,
that sound like a yes.
Right, we are hopeful, but it really depends on where the priorities of the administration will end up being.
Well, one of the ways that the community board can be most helpful in that sort of capacity is that we get to advocate for the budget. And so if there are ever programs, initiatives that you're applying for through the council, or any budget requests, you should send our way, and we can help advocate for those sorts of initiatives, both in our district and then Manhattan wide as well.
Absolutely. And the utilization of our funds has to align with, because again, we serve you. The question is, what do you want to see your DA's office do? How do you want us to use the resources that have been given to us, either through public or private funds? And if you determine that, we want you to focus on frontline operations, we want you to work on diverting cases in an earlier way so people are not languishing in the criminal justice system for months or years at a time, we can absolutely do that. We just need to allocate the resources in the right way.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Rebecca,
Next, let's go back.
Somebody, okay.
Yeah, there's one last person.
Okay, then
can
I
we
would
unmute
love to.
Stephanie again?
Stephanie.
Yes. I just wanted to follow up on Russell's comment about shoplifting. And I don't know if you're aware that there are certain stores where it is known that they don't go after shoplifters. They just let them take what they want. I heard today, apparently one of them is Target. You just pick up something and take it. And what that has amounted to is, I can't go into a CVS to buy a tube of toothpaste because it's locked up, and you have to find a worker to unlock the toothpaste or the shampoo, and then you can go to the counter and pay for it. So it is an issue. It's a quality of life issue, and I don't know what you do about it, but it's very apparent that it's almost a free-for-all in some stores to take what you want and just get out.
I heard about that same thing that you heard about Target. And I will say that Target is at the table with us in terms of figuring out strategies to address this. So anybody who wants to work with us, we're inviting them to the table, and Target is definitely one of the companies that has been working with us.
Thank you.
Sorry, Barbara, one more. Barry Snyder.
Good evening, and thank you very much for joining us this evening from the DA's office. Greatly appreciated. One very quick question. You mentioned earlier about the civil forfeitures is no longer available. Can you talk a little bit about that, and when can you get your, how can it help you get your hands on that money? We can share it, of course.
Right. Absolutely. The challenge is not that it isn't available anymore. It's just that the federal government has changed the manner in which we can either seize assets or distribute assets that have been seized and liquidated by our office. So it's hard to compare it, but we were able to seize either the instrumentalities or the fruits of a crime. The instrumentalities of a crime might be somebody using a car to get to a bank to steal money from that bank. The fruits of that crime might be, I've been able to, right? So for those who may not be familiar with it, just the idea that the government has now changed that the assets that we can seize, the method of our proving that these assets or that these forfeited goods or funds have been used in a crime, and the change has now focused us in not on the instrumentalities of the crime, but more on the fruits of the crime, and that is what was directly derived from the crime, makes it a smaller pool for us to seize and a smaller pool for us to be able to redistribute.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I think I have a better understanding now. Thank you. And continued good luck and good work for the city of New York and the borough of Manhattan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Schneider. Thank you.
Rebecca?
Yep, Meryl.
Okay.
Thanks so much. I'm just now thinking that a lot of the reason, for example, the Rite Aid has gone out on 82nd Street and 2nd Avenue is a wonderful store, is because of the high increase in insurance costs. Is there anything from just the commercial aspect, the insurance rates, which are so astronomical due to the shoplifting problem? Is there a program, a state program, somebody who can deal with that issue, a program for businesses, and not just small businesses? It's the Dwayne Reeds, it's the Rite Aids, it's the CVS and Target, you know. And Jesus, it would be a shame. They bring despite the fact we have a proliferation of them, they bring up the whole area. They're clean and neat and full of supplies and very useful to the neighborhood. It'd be a shame if they all shut down in lieu of nothing. So I'm thinking maybe there's also a commercial approach, and there's something that there has to be a state program and working with the DA and the police, because it is becoming a major problem, partly due to the two things that were mentioned by the DA, the pandemic and the proliferation of small crime. And so I appreciate your efforts, and I think that that has to be pursued both on the state and city level. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think that's part of what this small, and you're right, when I say small business, there are big businesses that are part of the conversation with us. And what we're learning from it is exactly what you described as some of these other approaches and support, different types of support that needs to be implemented. And I think that will be one of the outcomes of this continued collaboration that we're creating with PD and other city agencies.
Let's hope. I think it's a great thought. I don't know that it's been done much before, and let's hope it bears fruit.
We'll keep you posted.
Good. Thank you.
All right, Barbara, do you want to go next?
Okay, thank you. And like everybody else, I just want to thank you so much. It's been so informative and you're so well spoken and everything. I do have several questions, and some of them have been answered, but I sort of would like to think of it as sort of a different way. I first of all don't understand the interrelationship between the police and the DA. And I think in the last administration, it seemed to have been a little bit more fraught with disagreement. It seems to be a little bit better. But when the police say that they're starting the community policing, is the DA part of it? Are they in agreement with it? What is the not only in terms of money, the way that Will asked, but in terms of how you work together? The police complain that they arrest somebody and, the criminal turns around and walks out without anything happening and seem to be blaming the DA. So can you explain the interrelationship?
Sure, absolutely. We are, the old Law and Order show. that describes.
I know my whole legal knowledge comes from the Law and Order show, I will tell you.
It's
I say it
to
all
an
the time, it
extent,
is true.
yeah, it's true. I mean, the shows that we all know and enjoy, Blue Bloods, right? These are shows that speak with some truth about our experiences. And we are not in the sense of first responders. We are not on the front lines of crime and responding to crimes. We are not in the midst of the crisis as it's happening most often. We are the second wave of response. We're the second layer of response from the criminal justice system. And in that way, it almost functions like a relay race. They pass the baton to us once they've been there at the front of the race, beginning this process of having this crime responded to and hopefully corrected and ended. So they are in every way partners with our office, so that we make sure, though we're operating at different places in the race, we're still working toward the same goal. And Police Commissioner Sewell was in Nassau County before she was here in the city, and we sat across the table from one another. And I know that she is committed to the same goals that we are as an office. And DA Bragg has met with her and is in constant communication with her and those commanding officers in the department to make sure that we stay informed about their concerns. I just received from Chief Obey, who runs Police Patrol Borough Manhattan North. She shares specific concerns with me every day, and with Estelle and her team every day. We just met with all of the precincts in Manhattan North I think it was on the 16th, Estelle, that was hosted at our Washington Heights office. So the partnership is real. The partnership is one, just like any other relationship, any other professional dynamic. We are going to agree in places and we might disagree in places, but we still keep our eyes on the goals that we have in common. So
when you disagree, what happens? So they may take somebody young, somebody that did something and then you may say, well, we're not going to do that. How does it work? Who wins, I guess, or I don't, yeah.
It's interesting. You'd find that the disagreement happens far less often than one might believe. If our constant conversation happens because every night we're receiving new cases from them, and every day our supervisors are conferring on those cases with the officers who come in with new charges or even with existing cases. We disagree far less often than one might believe at a glance. But when we do, the question comes down to not just a theoretical discussion, but also an operational discussion. So it's one thing to determine if you have probable cause to make an arrest, and they may ask our advice about our interpretation of a particular incident. Do we have enough for a search warrant? Do we have enough for this particular charge? Is this a felony or misdemeanor? They may ask our advice and we'll talk about that. But there may be an ultimate question of whether or not this charge can be sustained at a trial or once the case is arraigned. Can we survive a motion to dismiss? That's our job. That's our province.
Absolutely.
Right.
I was thinking more on a policy level, though. Some things are what you may deem is less important to prosecute than the police may think so.
So if I can jump in, Joyce, just like our partnership with the community, we are in constant communication, as Joyce said, with PD. Today, I spent an hour walking around Washington Square Park with the commanding officer of the 9th Precinct. And he was, explaining to us some of the concerns that he has about making arrests, and then the person gets right back out. And I explained, sort of part of what we're doing in our view, and have arranged for him to meet with our chief assistant and possibly Joyce. Joyce doesn't know this yet. But so we hear them out and we explain why we're doing what we're doing, and they share with us what their concerns are about what we're doing. And sometimes, like everything we've talked about, we are in a complicated time where low-level cases are having an impact on the community. There's a lot of homelessness happening in NYCHA communities, and we're getting a lot of concern about that. What role does our office play? What role doesn't our office play? What role does PD play? What role don't they play? So these are going to be things that sometimes we're going to disagree on, and sometimes we're going to have to talk about for a while until we all come to a place to say, okay, what's the best way to do this? And the police commissioner I also think has been, really vocal about being smart about how they implement new things or revisit some old things that were done, but do them in a different way that is better for the community. So I would say, to Joyce's point also, I think we I disagree less than seems to be out there right now, but we also do disagree, or it's sometimes not even disagreement, it's sometimes misunderstanding.
Right.
When we sat down with the commanding officers of Manhattan North that night, I had a meeting with one of the precincts, and it was a very different dynamic because he actually said to the community how impressed he was with how the DA listened. And so sometimes things just get taken out of context and misunderstood, and we have to just keep talking to each other. So that's what we do.
Such a good answer. I'm so happy. I'm going to ask you something else, and I will tell you, I bored people tremendously with this. Somebody has to explain it. I don't get bail. And it's not a political thing of, anything like that. It seems to me when you talk about bail, you're assuming, it seems to me that one of two things are going to happen. You're either poor and can't pay bail and you're thrown into Rikers, which will be another big discussion, or you're rich and you can get out. To me, it seems to me if you do a crime, if you do something that should be separated from community, and whatever the separation means, whether it means, whatever it means is a different story. But it seems to be you should be separated, and the fact that you can pay bothers me, and I don't understand. And are you able to explain to me why bail, more or less, whatever you believe in, would be a helpful thing?
So Joyce is probably going to need to cover this one, but before she does, I just want to say, if possible, I don't know if there's any other questions, but also bail can be a whole hour conversation as well.
Love another thing.
But Joyce can give it in a nutshell, and then if people have an interest in talking more about that, we can do that. But I'd also want to make sure that we get Joyce off on time, because she also has to run the trial division tomorrow, and we're approaching 8 o'clock. So if we could wrap up after.
Okay, and then I have another big question too. But if that could be just, if you would say you would come back with that, I would love that. And there's another question I would like that would be a big question. Rikers. Just 1 second, Rebecca. It's Rikers. That Rikers seems to be a major problem. Not only is it a horrible place, but I wonder if some offenders are considered less dangerous because we don't have room for them. What are we doing in Rikers? Why does it take so long? So this is another follow-up committee I would love, because I don't think we can answer it yet. What are we doing? Why is it taking 1.5 years before somebody gets a trial, which is supposed to be speedy? What are we doing meanwhile with people once they're in there? Is that something that can be a follow-up and maybe combined also?
Absolutely. I think by all means, we should have a focused conversation just on those two giant questions you just asked, because we could speak literally for another 2 hours.
We're promising, I would love it. And I'm just going to ask one other very quick question and let Rebecca go. One of the frustrations I have, some of the ideas we love and we hear, but the practicality isn't there. So for instance, it's wonderful to say we're going to take the homeless off the subways and bring them someplace. Is it working? Do we have enough social workers? Do we have enough decent places, shelters or homes to go to? We know that homes are a problem. Our community board spends a lot of time talking about affordable housing. We don't have it. So is this wonderful ideas that in the near run will have any practicality at all, do you think?
That is exactly where we spend probably, I'd say 75% of our conversations, meetings, and time on that very problem. We see the problem. We believe the solution is an alternative to Rikers, but we can't build it out of thin air, right? We have to devote capital, we have to devote resources to it. And if that is not a priority for our city council, if it's not a priority for it has to be a collective priority. We all have to agree that that is an important concern, providing affordable or alternative housing options for the unhoused or for people who are on our streets without any recourse. So Yes, that is exactly our frustration, because when we, the police department or the DA's office, encounter these individuals, it's for a crime. That's the symptom of the problem. The symptom of the problem that pre-existed the crime is the fact that they're homeless. So we need those pre-existing conditions to be addressed so that we don't reach the problem with the symptom being something that we all experience to our detriment. We want to make sure that that pre-existing condition is addressed.
Great. So I didn't mark down your contact. Will has, and we'll get it, and you're going to hear from us in our committee.
Absolutely.
We look forward to it. Thank you so much.
Okay. I just have a couple of questions, and I'll keep them brief.
I have questions too. This is Wilma. I would like to have questions, at least 3 questions. If I can, I'll wait till next time we have a session.
Unless, are we able to get some of those in, and maybe we could respond in writing, Estelle, or is there?
Yeah, we're happy.
Okay. Yes.
So is that?
What we'll do is write the minutes and then have additional questions at the end and send it to you. Try to get questions. We'll maybe send an email to people to say you have additional questions, but it may be we have 2 or 3 different meetings that we have to.
Yeah. And I would just say, remember that somebody from my team will be at every, all the community board meetings, the bigger ones. And then if you want us to come to this one, we can come. And if it's questions that me or my team can answer, we'll do it. And if we need to bring Joyce or somebody on Joyce's behalf, we can do that as well. I think getting some written questions would be great at this point.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Just really quickly, you kind of mentioned this, but I think it's important to note during, the campaign for a new DA, there was a lot of concern about the backlog of cases because of COVID. Could you just say where we are now, how it's going? It doesn't need to be long, but just to kind of update us on that problem.
Well, we've been able to reduce the backlog significantly. I regret that I don't have our percentage points in front of me, but we've been able to reduce by more than half. I want to say that's just a rough guess. The cases that were sitting either unarraigned or unindicted, we now have moved through those and have a fast track, especially on gun cases, which I do want to make this point before we close out. The Office of Court Administration, through the Chief Judge, Janet DeFiore, has issued an initiative, a mandate throughout the city that we have to create new parts in every courthouse that can fast track any case involving a firearm, involving a gun. That fast track process has increased the volume of cases that are now being tried, that are going to hearings, and that are being resolved with a pace that I've not seen before, because we now have 3 dedicated judges plus a 4th part to siphon through those cases. So the backlog that we had before, the first priority has now been placed through OCA and our efforts on gun cases. It is, it's put a strain on our resources, but we're meeting the challenges every day. Our ADAs are in these court parts doing everything possible to make sure cases are not languishing in the months and years as others have spoken about.
And because I want Wilma to be able to ask her questions, I'm just going to tell you briefly that I'm going to follow up with you guys on reverse search warrants, and maybe hopefully whether Alvin Bragg would be more interested than Cy Vance was in not disclosing the data that was necessarily captured in the previous reverse search warrant that happened in our neighborhood, but at least letting the people who were affected know, I think would be a great strategy. I had asked him when he was running, if he would commit not to using reverse search warrants. He totally understood kind of the concern, but obviously he's a lawyer, so never say never. But I think that's something that we'll follow up with you. I just want to make sure Wilma has a chance to ask something as well.
And no, it's okay. I'm going to put it in writing. Just spend the time.
Wilma, thank you so much for understanding that. We will make sure that we get your questions answered.
Thank you.
Because you did say something about time, so I'm respecting that. I'm respecting that time that you mentioned a few minutes ago. I'll put mine in writing.
We appreciate that.
Put some in writing, and then we're going to be happy to see you at meeting. I'm just going to say at full board meetings, we don't have questions if you respond, and this is the place where we can have more of a dialogue. People to come.
Yes.
Well, thank you, everybody. And goodbye to our two wonderful guests that were so interesting.
Thank
Thank
you
you
so much.
so much.
Keep us safe. Keep us safe.
Absolutely. Thank you. And
Thank
keep
you.
us informed.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Take
Thank
care,
you very
everyone.
much.
Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Thank you so much. Any old business, new business? We will have a continuation of this and an email if anybody else has any questions. We would like it, and we will have minutes that the three of us will work on.
And we'll definitely, just in response to Russell's questions, and I saw some reactions from the participants about getting involved in those kind of working group or,
Right.
community advisory. We'll make sure we get that info to
Yeah,
everybody.
we do have a small business committee. I don't know if they would. What I wanted to say is that it affects not only the businesses, but the whole community. We have now these huge CVS empty stores and some of them went out because they just couldn't take the looting anymore. And as it was said, you go in and there's guards over, and it's just not the way it used to be and the way it should be. So I just have to
Any
ask Ellen,
motion?
is Ellen in New York or Florida? I'll speak to her later. She's muted. Thank you, everybody.
I'm here. I'm in New York.
Oh, good to see you. Okay.
Yeah.
Ellen, do you want to make a motion to adjourn since you're unmuted?
I'm sorry?
Motion to adjourn,
Make a
right?
motion
Oh,
to adjourn.
okay, motion to adjourn.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Good night.